Cut power to that locomotive or we'll press charges. The voice of the railroad CEO crackled over the radio as Eli continued helping freezing passengers onto his improvised rescue train. Just a day earlier, the same people had written off his grandfather's private railroad as nothing more than an outdated relic. Now, with 229 lives hanging in the balance, Eli was faced with a choice: obey the command or see through what he'd begun. Hi everyone, welcome to Life Tales. Let's dive in. Eli Grant stood in silence, watching a massive wall of snow swell along the horizon. At 60 years old, he'd been through enough Montana winters to know when things were about to get serious, and this storm wasn't playing around. The radio was warning of the worst blizzard in 15 years, but Eli had been studying the sky since sunrise. In his gut, he knew it was going to be even worse. His ranch hand, Javier, rolled up to the barn just as Eli was going through supplies. South pasture herds moved to the protected valley, Javier shouted from the truck. You really think the storm's gonna hit as hard as they say? It's gonna be worse, Eli replied, his breath puffing white in the icy air. You should get home. Be with your family. This one's going to shut everything down for a while. As Javier drove off, Eli turned toward another section of his land that needed attention before the storm hit: his railroad. Most folks thought the idea of a private rail line cutting through a cattle ranch was laughable in this day and age. But 5 miles of standard gauge track snaked across Eli's property, connecting to a mountain pass that met the main rail line on the far side. His grandfather had laid those rails back in the 1920s, back when trains were the only dependable way to move livestock to market. Any other rancher would have torn them up long ago, sold the steel, turned the land back into pasture. But not Eli. For 3 generations, his family had kept that track alive and functional. He still used it from time to time, hauling hay, moving heavy equipment, pulling it all with a vintage diesel-electric locomotive he'd salvaged from a scrapyard 2 decades back. He'd rebuilt it by hand, learning as he went, machining parts himself when originals were impossible to find. As Eli studied the dark clouds rolling in, he thought back to stories his grandfather used to tell, especially the one about the 1947 blizzard, when he'd used that very track to rescue stranded neighbors. We don't wait for permission to do what's right, the old man always said. Eli had only been 7 at the time, but those words had taken root. That railroad wasn't just steel and wood. It was legacy. It was lifeline. For years, the local historical society had been trying to convince him to turn it into a tourist attraction. They called it living history. The state even dangled grant money to help convert it into a scenic ride. But Eli turned them all down. This wasn't some novelty. It was a working railroad, and he intended to keep it that way. He took his truck out along the narrow service road that ran beside the tracks, inspecting for anything that might need fixing before the storm closed in. When he reached the switch where his spur met the mountain pass line, he noticed the mechanism was already crusted with ice. Grabbing his tools, he spent the next 30 minutes chipping it clean and greasing the moving parts, making sure everything would work even under freezing conditions. Just as he wrapped up, his radio hissed with a weather update. The National Weather Service had upgraded their warning: 3 to 4 feet of snow expected in the valleys, even more in the mountains, with wind speeds nearing 60 miles per hour. Yeah, Eli muttered to himself. This one's gonna be rough. By the time he made it back to the house, the snow had already begun falling. He stocked the wood stove, checked the generator, and made sure his satellite phone was charged. Out here, cell reception was flaky even on clear days. In a storm like this, it'd be dead. That night, the blizzard came in hard just as Eli had expected. Wind screamed around the house, snowdrifts piled high against the porch, and the whole place groaned under the pressure. He barely slept, waking up every couple of hours to feed the fire. By morning, everything outside had vanished into a white abyss. He was pouring coffee when the satellite phone rang. The screen lit up. Sheriff Ward. Morning, Caleb, Eli answered. Eli, we've got a situation. That passenger train from Seattle to Chicago? It's stuck, stranded just past Elk Pass. Eli set his mug down. How long's it been there? Engine trouble started overnight. They managed to get through part of the pass, but they broke down about 4 miles past the eastern tunnel. Over 200 people on board, kids, seniors, families. Caleb sighed heavily. And that's where the trouble starts, he said. Main line's blocked. Avalanche hit about 20 miles west of them. The railroad's dispatching rescue gear from the east, but the interstate's closed and the weather's not letting up. They won't make it today, Eli said, cutting to the point. Maybe not even tomorrow. Trains on backup generators, bare lights, limited heat. They're already rationing fuel. Eli turned to the window, staring at the blizzard outside. So what are they asking me to do? Nothing yet, the sheriff said. This is me calling, not them. Railroad's still crawling through red tape. But I know your spur line connects just west of where they're stuck. And just like that, Eli saw it. His grandfather's old line might be the only route left. My locomotive can get through the pass from this side, he said, mostly thinking aloud. Tracks are still in good shape. That steam engine still runs? She's not steam. She's a 1950s diesel electric. And yeah, she runs just fine. Eli had spent years keeping that machine alive. Most people thought it was just a quirky pastime, something to keep an old man busy. They didn't get it. Eli wasn't interested in nostalgia. He believed in having systems you could rely on when everything else failed. I'll bring it up to the railroad's emergency coordinator, the sheriff said. Just needed to know if it was even possible before I did. It's possible, Eli replied. Whether they'll want help from a rancher with an old train on private rails, that's a different story. Mr. Grant, this is a serious situation. We've got passengers stuck in worsening conditions, the man said firmly. I'm well aware, Eli replied, calm but direct. I'm at the junction now, inspecting the line. It's clear. If the weather holds, my locomotive can reach that train in under 3 hours. There was another pause on the line. You're proposing that a private citizen using uncertified equipment conduct a rescue mission through a snow-covered mountain pass? I'm telling you I can get to your people before your official equipment even gets close, Eli answered. It's your call. Mr. Grant, while your concern is appreciated, Western Rail has strict emergency protocols. We've already dispatched specialized rescue units from our eastern depot. It's just a matter of time, Eli cut in. Time those passengers might not have. Your equipment is coming from the wrong side of closed highways and buried tracks. I'm only 8 miles out and I've got a machine that runs. I understand where you're coming from, but there are legal considerations, liability, regulations. There are human beings freezing to death, Eli said sharply. You do whatever you think you have to. I'll be ready if you change your mind. Without waiting for a reply, he ended the call and steered the snowcat back toward the ranch. Whether the railroad approved or not, Eli knew he had to get ready. Back in his shop, he began prepping for the run. He couldn't just hop in the locomotive and go, he needed to be fully equipped. Tools, first aid kits, thermal blankets, food, he loaded it all onto his snowmobile for transport. Over the next 2 hours, his satellite phone buzzed 4 more times. Each time it was the same executive, circling back with more questions, more corporate stalling, more red tape. Every call ended the same, no authorization. By mid-afternoon, the situation on the train had taken a darker turn. Fuel for the generators was nearly gone. Temperatures inside the train cars were plummeting. Reports were coming in, elderly passengers showing signs of hypothermia, a child with asthma struggling to breathe in the frigid air. Eli was crouched in his shop, fine-tuning a fuel transfer pump when the door burst open and a gust of snow swept in. Sheriff Caleb Ward stepped inside, bundled in cold weather gear, his face tight with frustration. They're still stalling, he said, not bothering with a greeting. All they care about is insurance and liability. Meanwhile, people are freezing, Eli said, rising to his feet. Exactly. I've been on calls with emergency services, even the governor's office. Everyone's passing the buck, arguing over jurisdiction and who's responsible. He pulled off his gloves and warmed his hands near the workshop's heater. What are you getting ready for? Eli motioned toward the gear he'd laid out. What does it look like? Looks like you're going through with it, whether they like it or not. These tracks run through my land. The junction is on my property. What I do with my own equipment is my business. The sheriff held Eli's gaze for a long moment. You realize if they find out, they'll try to shut you down, legally or otherwise. Hard to stop something they don't see coming. Eli, I'm the sheriff. I can't officially be aware of any of this. Then let's talk unofficially. What's the real situation on that train? Caleb sighed heavily. Unofficially? It's bad. The heat's almost gone. They've got sick passengers. And the railroad still swears their crews will get there by tomorrow afternoon. Eli checked his watch. That's nearly a full day away. It's going to hit 15 below tonight. I know. The sheriff started heading back toward the door, then paused. I never had this conversation with you. But if someone were to get those folks help before the official rescue rolls in, sometimes forgiveness comes easier than permission. As soon as the door closed behind him, Eli kicked into high gear. He drove his snowcat to the engine shed where his pride and joy, a General Motors EMD GP9 from 1954, waited. He'd picked it up years ago for next to nothing when it was pulled from service, and spent countless hours restoring it piece by piece. That 1,750 horsepower diesel-electric was built for jobs like this: harsh weather, steep grades, remote mountain routes. Eli began the preheat cycle and ran through every system. The engine growled to life, its deep rumble vibrating through the walls of the metal shed. On any normal day, he would have let it idle and warm up properly. But there was nothing normal about this. He backed the locomotive onto the main spur and hooked it up to the 2 cars he'd prepped: a modified cattle car with benches and wood-burning stoves for warmth, and a caboose stocked as a mobile workshop. No, it wasn't a passenger train, but it would do the job. The wind hadn't let up. It whipped across the ranch, flinging snow sideways across the open land. Eli scanned the horizon, making sure no uninvited visitors, especially anyone from Western Rail, were lurking nearby. When the coast was clear, he opened the throttle. The locomotive clanked to life, wheels slowly turning as it rolled forward on his private track toward the junction. In the caboose, everything was ready: blankets, food, water, medical kits. Whether Western Rail approved or not, he was going. The tracks held up, just like he'd hoped. Fall maintenance had paid off. But as he neared the junction, his heart sank. Parked across the rails was a Western Rail truck, its headlights blazing through the swirling snow. A man in a company-issued parka was waving his arms, signaling for Eli to stop. Eli hit the brakes and brought the train to a halt about 50 yards short. He climbed down into the freezing wind, coat pulled tight around him, and made his way toward the figure. "Grant, stop right there," the man yelled. "I've got direct orders from Mr. Pierce. You are not authorized to proceed." "Those passengers are freezing," Eli shouted back. "Your crew won't reach them in time." "That's not your call to make. This is Western Rail property. If you continue, we'll seize your equipment and press charges." Eli glanced toward the switch. It would take him less than a minute to throw it and connect to the mountain pass line. The man must have seen the decision forming in his eyes, because he stepped in front of the switch and squared his shoulders. "Don't even think about it, Grant. I'm authorized to use any means necessary to prevent unauthorized access." Eli looked him over. The guy was young, probably some middle manager handed a miserable assignment. He didn't look eager to be there, standing in a blizzard, shouting at a rancher. "What's your name?" Eli asked. The man hesitated. "Kemp. Eric Kemp." "Well, Mr. Kemp, let me ask you this. When you go back and report that you stopped me, are you ready to explain to the families of anyone who doesn't survive tonight that you were just following orders?" Kemp's confident stance faltered. "That's not fair. The company is doing everything we can." "Everything except accepting the help that's right in front of them," Eli shot back. "I'm not looking for a green light, Mr. Kemp. I'm going through that junction. You can either help me throw the switch or stand there and watch, but I'm not turning around." For several long seconds, neither man moved. The wind shrieked through the narrow pass, and snow piled steadily on their shoulders, burying their boots. Finally, Kemp averted his eyes, his body language deflating. "I was never here," he muttered, stepping out of the way. "Got stuck in a drift. Couldn't make it to the switch. By the time I got my truck moving again, you were already gone." Eli gave a small nod. "Sounds like a fair enough report." As Kemp headed back to the warmth of his truck, Eli walked over and threw the switch himself, linking his spur line directly to the main track. Climbing back into the cab, Eli caught sight of Kemp rolling down his window. "Good luck out there, Grant," he called. "They need you." This was it, the line he couldn't uncross. The moment Eli took his locomotive onto Western Rail's track, he'd be breaking all kinds of rules. He'd be trespassing, violating protocols, opening himself up to lawsuits, maybe even criminal charges. He hesitated for the briefest of moments, then pushed the throttle forward. The engine surged ahead, wheels cutting through the snow-dusted rails as it began the grueling ascent into Elk Pass. The route was dangerous under normal conditions. In the middle of a blizzard, it was downright deadly. Eli dropped his speed, depending on memory and the glow of the locomotive's headlamp to guide him. Snow pelted the windshield, wiping out any view beyond a few yards. The first tunnel appeared fast, a narrow, rocky corridor just a quarter-mile long. It offered a brief break from the relentless wind. Eli exhaled, gripping the controls tightly. But on the other side was the most nerve-wracking section of the route, the curved trestle bridge that spanned Weber Canyon. He slowed to a crawl. The bridge moaned under the locomotive's weight as it inched forward, the steel slick with ice. Each groan vibrated up through the cab. Eli kept one hand on the throttle, the other on the brake, his eyes glued to the snowy blur ahead. The bridge held. He made it across. Then came the second tunnel, nearly a mile long and pitch black. Only the narrow beam from the locomotive's lamp cut into the darkness. As he emerged from the far end, his GPS confirmed the distance. Just under 3 miles to go. And then he saw it. Faint glimmers of light, almost swallowed by the snowdrifts. There, in the distance, was the stranded train. Eli pulled back the throttle, bringing the engine to a stop about 50 yards away. He reached for his satellite phone and called. "Sheriff, it's Eli. I'm at the train. Heading over now." "Officially?" Caleb's voice came through. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Good luck." Bundling up, Eli stepped down into snow that reached his thighs. The wind slammed into him, cutting through layers as he trudged toward the train. Inside the cars, movement stirred. Faces pressed against frosted windows. Someone pointed. A child raised their hand, palm flat to the glass. A conductor pushed open a door near the front, his uniform nearly hidden beneath heavy cold weather gear. "Who the hell are you?" he shouted over the wind. "Eli Grant," he replied, climbing up onto the steps without hesitation. "I've got a working locomotive and 2 cars on the other side of the pass. I can start evacuating your most vulnerable passengers." The conductor looked stunned. "Where did you even come from?" Dispatch said no help was coming until sometime tomorrow. "I've got a private line that cuts through the pass," Eli explained, already stepping inside. "Now, how bad is it?" Worse than he'd expected. The inside of the car was bitterly cold. Passengers were curled up under layers of blankets, wearing every stitch of clothing they had. Their breath came out in thick clouds. "We're just about out of fuel for the generator," the conductor said, guiding Eli through the dim aisle. "Emergency lights are all that's left. There's no real heat anymore, just body warmth." Medical situations are piling up in the next car. The crew had tried to consolidate the most at-risk passengers into a single space: elderly folks, families with small children, and anyone struggling with health issues. An older woman trembled beneath a pile of coats and scarves. Nearby, a young mother held a boy who wheezed faintly with every breath, his asthma worsening in the freezing air. "How many people total?" Eli asked. 217 passengers plus a dozen crew. Eli did the math in his head. His converted cattle car could handle about 40 people at a time safely, at least. "I can take 40 now," he said. "We start with the elderly, the kids, and anyone who's in medical distress. If the weather holds, I'll come back for the rest." The conductor hesitated. Railroad never cleared any of this. "Look around you," Eli said. "These people can't wait for forms and phone calls. You really going to wait on a signature while they freeze?" The man looked down the car, then back at Eli and gave a resolute nod. "All right, let's move." News traveled fast. The crew jumped into action, pulling together a list of who needed out the most. Within 20 minutes, they had a group assembled: senior citizens, parents clutching toddlers, people with medical issues who couldn't endure much longer. But getting them out wasn't easy. The gap between Eli's train and the stranded one was a field of waist-deep snow, uneven and dangerous. Eli and 2 crew members stomped out a rough trail, packing it as best they could. Then they began the careful transfer, 1 person at a time. Some passengers stumbled through the snow, others had to be carried. The older woman was laid on an improvised stretcher. The asthmatic child was bundled in layers and cradled in his father's arms. Others clung to bags, kids, and each other as they made their way through the whiteout. Once the first group was safely inside the heated car, Eli checked the wood stoves. The benches were rough and the blankets were military-grade, not pretty, but warm. It wasn't comfortable, but it was a hell of a lot better than what they'd left behind. "I'll be back for more soon as I can," Eli told the conductor. "Have the next group ready." The ride back was slower, much slower. Eli handled the engine with extra caution. The bridge crossing felt twice as long with vulnerable people on board. In the car behind him, members of the train crew did what they could, offering food, wrapping shivering passengers, checking pulses. The mood was tense, but there was something else now too: hope. When they finally cleared the pass and rolled back onto Eli's land, it felt like a victory. As his ranch came into view, red and blue lights pierced the fog. Ambulances, fire trucks, emergency vans. Sheriff Ward had pulled it off, coordinating a full medical response without ever naming who'd made the rescue possible. The locomotive rolled to a stop and the passengers were quickly transferred to the waiting vehicles. Some went straight into ambulances, others boarded warm buses headed for the high school gym, which had been converted into a shelter. Eli didn't stop to take it in. He refueled the locomotive and got ready for the next trip. "They're furious," Caleb said under his breath as they watched people being loaded into vehicles. Railroad figured out what's happening. They're talking lawsuits, criminal charges, the whole 9 yards. "They can say whatever they want," Eli said calmly as he climbed back into the cab. "Once everyone's safe, they can throw all the threats they like." The second run went more smoothly thanks to the trail they'd already carved through the snow. Another 40 passengers were evacuated, followed by a third group soon after. By the time midnight rolled around, Eli had pulled 120 people off that freezing train and delivered them to safety. Just as he started preparing for a fourth trip, the weather took a brutal turn. The wind grew fierce, flinging snow sideways with blinding force. Visibility shrank to almost nothing. "It's getting dangerous out there," the sheriff warned as Eli refueled again. "Might be smarter to wait for daylight." Eli glanced up from the controls. There are still close to 100 people stuck on that train, and they've been without heat for hours. Some of them won't last the night. Before Caleb could respond, Eli's satellite phone rang. The number on the screen wasn't one he recognized. "Grant," he answered. "Mr. Grant, this is Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Western Rail." The man's voice was cold, measured, but sharp with underlying fury. "I understand you've decided to take matters into your own hands, disrupting our emergency response protocols. And I understand you left families to freeze while your legal team played tug-of-war with the risk forms," Eli shot back. "Our rescue team is scheduled to arrive by morning." Eli didn't skip a beat. "Morning won't cut it. I've already evacuated 120 passengers. I'm heading back for the rest now. Mr. Grant, I'm officially instructing you to cease all activity immediately. You're trespassing on railroad property and operating equipment without authorization." Eli didn't let him finish. "Listen closely," he said. "I'm going to finish what I started. When this is over, your lawyers can do whatever they want. But I don't have time for corporate lectures right now. I've got lives to save." He ended the call without waiting for a response, climbed back into the cab, and gave the throttle a firm push. The sheriff stood nearby, his face a mix of concern and admiration. "They're not bluffing, you know," he said quietly. "They'll come after you hard." "So will I," Eli replied, eyes forward. "For every last person still stuck out there." And with that, the locomotive rumbled forward once more, disappearing into the white chaos, headed back up the mountain. The fourth trip was by far the toughest. The blizzard had grown into a full-on whiteout. Eli could barely see past the edge of the cab. Wind screamed through the peaks, battering the trestle bridge as he crossed it again, this time inching forward, feeling every groan and tremor through the controls. By the time he reached the train, things had turned critical. Inside the stranded cars, temperatures had plunged far below freezing. Condensation hung like fog with every breath. People were pale and trembling, some so cold they could no longer speak, just sat hunched in silence beneath layers of blankets. There was no time to waste. Eli and the train crew moved fast, evacuating everyone left. They packed the remaining passengers into his converted car, into the caboose, and even into the narrow hallway of the locomotive cab. Seniors were carried out. Kids were bundled tight and passed along a chain of helping hands. Eli knew the train was overloaded, but he wasn't leaving a single soul behind. As the first hints of dawn broke, just a faint gray smear against the snow-heavy sky, Eli began the return trip. He coaxed the engine forward, gently guiding it back over the frozen trestle. The wind howled and the ice had thickened, causing the bridge to sway beneath the extra weight. Still, it held. Finally, as he descended from the pass and back onto his own land, Eli spotted something unexpected. A convoy of Western rail vehicles, trucks and SUVs, was parked near his ranch. Logos gleamed on the sides, and a group of uniformed men stood silently in the snow, watching as his locomotive crawled toward them. Eli brought the train to a halt beside the waiting emergency crews. As passengers were being helped down, a man in a long wool coat stepped forward, flanked by 2 company representatives. "Mr. Grant," the man said. "I'm Jonathan Pierce." Eli didn't answer right away. He was busy helping an elderly man down from the car, steadying his feet on the icy ground. "Once everyone's taken care of," Eli said finally, his tone steady but firm. It took close to an hour to unload the final group. Medical personnel moved quickly, blanketing passengers, checking vital signs, getting them into warm vehicles. Only after the last person was safely inside did Eli turn to face the railroad executives. "You've put this company in a very difficult position," Pierce said, his voice clipped but tense. "Your actions, regardless of intent, created significant liability." Eli met his gaze evenly. "Did your official rescue crew ever make it?" Pierce shifted uncomfortably. "They were delayed further, road closures." "Then I'd say my unauthorized actions saved quite a few lives." "That's not the issue." "No," Eli said, cutting him off. "That's exactly the issue. Everything else? That's just paperwork." Pierce didn't respond immediately. He looked away for a moment, processing. "You're aware," he said slowly, "that we could file criminal charges. Civil suits. You could lose everything." Eli looked over at his locomotive, still running, still steaming gently in the freezing morning air. It had carried 3 generations. It had done its job. "Then go ahead," he said quietly. "I already did what I came to do." Pierce exhaled, his shoulders finally relaxing just a little. "That's not the reason I came," he said, gesturing toward the last of the ambulances pulling away. "Legal's pushing for action, sure. But 229 people are alive because of you. One of them was my sister. Her kids were on that train." That caught Eli off guard. His expression softened slightly. "I'm here to talk about another option," Pierce continued. "Western Rail would like to propose a formal partnership involving your rail line." "I'm not selling," Eli said without hesitation. "This railroad stays right here." "I'm not asking you to sell it," Pierce replied. "What I'm offering is a cooperative agreement. Your track is a vital emergency corridor. One we'd like to recognize officially." Eli studied him. "What kind of agreement are we talking about?" "You keep full operational control. We provide funding for upkeep, track maintenance, equipment upgrades. In emergency situations, your line becomes part of our network. You stay in charge of running it." Eli raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to slap a logo on it and turn it into a tourist ride?" Pierce gave a small smile. "No sightseeing trains, I promise. This would be a working route. But I'll be honest, after what you've done, I think the public's going to be interested regardless." Clips of Eli's train pushing through the blizzard began circulating online, sparking a wave of attention across the country. What had once been a forgotten stretch of private rail suddenly became a symbol of courage, self-reliance, and quiet heroism. Not long after, the passengers he'd saved organized a community gathering at the high school gym. One by one, families stepped up to the microphone. Kids who had once shivered in Eli's blankets now ran across the gym floor, laughing, no longer afraid. There were tears. There was applause. And there was gratitude. At the end of the evening, they presented a small wooden plaque that read, "To Eli Grant for acting when others waited." True to his word, Jonathan Pierce and Western Rail followed through. They finalized a formal partnership officially designating Eli's line as an emergency alternate route. The agreement allowed Eli to maintain full control of his railroad while Western Rail supplied the resources, upgrades for the track, new signaling equipment, and even a backup locomotive sourced from their decommissioned fleet. The county officials who once pushed Eli to turn the line into a novelty ride had changed their tune completely. Now they recognized the railroad for what it was, essential infrastructure. The Historical Society still wanted to honor its past, but now they respected its purpose in the present. 3 months after the rescue, Eli stood near the junction, hands in his coat pockets, watching as a work crew installed a brand new set of signal lights. For the first time, his line appeared on Western Rail's official emergency response maps, with his name listed right there, Local Route Specialist. Sheriff Ward's patrol car crunched to a stop beside him. The sheriff stepped out, eyeing the new equipment with a smirk. "Quite the turnaround, huh? Seems like just yesterday they were threatening to slap you with lawsuits." Eli gave a slight nod. "Turns out being old-fashioned isn't such a bad thing as long as it still works." Ward chuckled. "You know, most folks would have caved. Probably turned it into a museum exhibit or scrapped it altogether." "Most folks think newer always means better," Eli said, glancing down the snowy rails. "But sometimes the old ways hold up when the new ones fall apart." The sheriff followed his gaze, eyes tracing the line of track as it disappeared into the hills, just as it had nearly 100 years earlier when Eli's grandfather first hammered it into the earth. "He'd be proud," Ward said after a moment. "Not just that you kept it going, but what you did with it when it counted." Eli didn't answer. He simply watched as the signal lights blinked in perfect rhythm, each one a quiet testament to what that railroad had become. This line was no longer just a leftover from another time. It wasn't obsolete. It wasn't forgotten. It had proven its worth the way few things ever do, by saving lives when there were no other options left. And Eli realized something. The things that truly matter aren't always the ones that evolve or keep up with the times. Sometimes they're the ones that endure, passed down, preserved, trusted when everything else fails. Not as relics, not as decorations, but as tools, built with intention, maintained with pride. Ready when the call comes. His railroad was exactly where it was meant to be, still running across his ranch, still reaching into the past, still ready to move when needed. Not as a photo op, not as a dusty artifact, but as what his grandfather had always intended it to be. A working railroad with a purpose and a job to do. If this story moved you, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to Life Tales. There's another powerful story waiting on your screen, don't miss it. We'll see you in the next one.